Many tens of thousands of years ago, a lone hairless mammal with an impressive brain and a soft body was out exploring the area for its clan when it saw a gray fur-covered creature peering out from the edge of the forest. The beast didn't have the look of something that might make a meal. Its eyes were too knowing, with a glint of comprehension somehow similar to the human's own. The gray animal crept furtively at the edge of the tree line, gazing back at the human with a similar interest, similarly uncertain as to whether the tall, relatively hairless biped was friend, foe, or food. This day they would keep their distance, and each would run back to their own kind to relate what they had seen. Human and wolf, first contact. It is now months later in this long ago time, and the human and their group have been fortunate enough to fell an antelope, or some proto-version thereof, with their rudimentary tools and exceptional tenacity. They've learned the dangers of contamination and spoilage, so rather than wait, they immediately field-dress the beast and stoke a flame to cook the spoils of the hunt. They give thanks, in their way, and set in, congratulating one another in a forgotten tongue as they happily and hungrily devour succulent mouthfuls. The human often finds the company of their clan too noisome during mealtimes. So as they are wont, they take their portion of the dripping meat and a large leg bone for protection, to scout the perimeter and enjoy their meal in relative quiet. The wolf, also a scout for his pack, catches the scent of the human he saw once before. This winter has been hard, and large prey difficult to catch, but the wolf knows that by following the strange biped and his kind, there is often food to be had. As he soundlessly pads along the forest floor, the scent of flesh wafts through the woodland air, gliding along the breeze until it reaches the wolf's exquisitely delicate nose. The meat has a special scent. It's hot and succulent, touched by flame in a way the wolf has only encountered when the humans have done something to it. The wolf begins to follow this aroma, rather than that of the human, salivating just a bit, the tip of his flexible nose working left and right to triangulate the correct direction. Startled, the human raises the still warm bone and assumes a defensive posture, eyes flashing a warning glint of aggression. The wolf bristles at first, but since the distance between them is ample, it relaxes, communicating that it is neither afraid nor prepared to attack. The wind picks up. The scent of the still warm leg bone drifts through the air again. The wolf lifts his head slightly, sniffs audibly, then licks its muzzle hungrily, eyes fixed not on the human, but its hands and the warm bone therein. The human has heard the howls, in day and night. While most of the others in their clan fear the somehow mournful sound, he is drawn to it. It seems to seek him, seems to say, "Where are you, friend?" While some of the elders say it is a call to the dead, this human is certain there is a less arcane message to be read. In the howls, the human hears communication. And if it can communicate with its own kind, maybe, just maybe, it can communicate with him as well. Perhaps it is looking at the bone not with trepidation but for some other reason. He remembers seeing gnawed leg bones left at old campsites, hastily left behind as the humans approached. Other than temporary, somewhat fragile weapons, these bones serve little purpose to the humans, and most are usually discarded. The wolf looks at the human's eyes, then back at the bone, with another flick of the tongue. Finishing the last bite of the meat in their left hand, the human changes their grip on the bone in their right. Rather than brandishing it, they hold it outstretched, advancing ever so slowly towards the wolf. Closer. Closer. The wolf maintains position, and its body posture softens somewhat. Now they are within 15 feet of each other, closer than ever before. The human crouches down slightly and places the bone on the ground before stepping back, both hands extended forward as a gentle warning to maintain distance. Can I say this scenario happened exactly as I depicted it? No. But based on what we do know, we can make an educated guess that something very similar happened many thousands of times with different individuals from each group of animal over a very long period of time. At first, humans did not intentionally domesticate wolves, and wolves did not intentionally groom humans to be their guardians. Instead, the two species simply grew closer together over the millennia in a slow dance, until the exceptionally compatible circles of their individual existences became proximate, then linked, then one single circle, home. By this time, the wild wolf was now something different, as was the human in their way. By chance, by fate, and by choice, the planet's greatest friendship was born. That is an excerpt from my second book on dogs. My first was called Putting Paws to Pavement. This episode is going to be all about one of the great loves of my life, which is dogs. Canis lupus familiaris. The domestic quadruped that has been with humans since before we had cities, since we were just barely trying to survive. And all evidence points to the fact that we would not have survived without them. The dog-human relationship, as much as it is spoken of, is often not truly understood with its proper gravity. Dogs were the first sanitation system, the first heating system, and the first alarm system for humans. Dogs aren't just well-loved pets, but partners. One of my favorite stories to relate is that in one of the First Nations tales of creation, the Great Spirit is creating the world, and as they are creating the world, they are walking around looking at things with their dog in tow. That gives us the indication that for the First Nations people, or at least this particular group of First Nations people, the idea of being without a dog at one side was so unthinkable that even God had a dog. I like that idea. But let's get into it. You have returned to a special episode of the Focused on Infinity podcast. This one all about our canine companions, the present and future, with man's best friend. Let's talk about it. So as you may or may not know, my main business is/was, it's kind of hard to say at this point, given everything that's going on with COVID-19 and the tremendous uncertainty. At any rate, my main business has been, for the past 10 years, a dog walking and dog training company. When I got my dog, Fairo, may he rest well, I decided I was going to become the world's greatest dog parent, and as I tend to do, got deeply immersed in studying just everything I could about dogs and the dog-human history and dog training and all that sort of thing, and I really went full at it. I tried out a whole lot of different tactics and different methods of training with Fairo, and eventually discovered that the thing that worked best was positive training. Positive training meaning not dominance-based training. Training that works on a system of reward rather than on direct punishment. And we'll talk about the different kinds of punishment at some point. But, I think you know what I mean when I say punishment. And lots of us, when we were younger, we learned things like, you're supposed to rub the dog's nose in it when they have an accident, or, the whole rolled up newspaper thing, at least those of us who are a little bit older. And even people now, a lot of people still believe in what I call the dominance mythology. Well, the reason I started the episode with that story, which is the prologue to my upcoming dog book, is because the way that humans and dogs became friends, at least if we do sort of, a historical fiction sort of look at it based on what we know of the two species, if the dominance methodology made sense on its face, my contention is this. If we had approached the first wolves that became the proto-dogs angrily, if we had approached them aggressively, do you think they would have become our best friends? I certainly don't. I think that it is a little bit nonsensical to think that to be the case, right? The way that we became friends and companions is because we were nice to each other. It's the same way that it works for basically any social species, right? There are, yes, hierarchies in nature, sure, but on a day-to-day basis, on a moment-to-moment basis, hierarchical systems are not that important, and they certainly are not the main linchpin of what holds relationships together. It's kindness and mutual assistance. Like in the story, there must have been humans that they were not afraid of the wolves, and they were like, that thing looks interesting to me. Let me try and talk to it. I often joke that I will try and communicate with literally any animal. It doesn't matter if it's a squirrel, a rabbit, a bird. I will definitely try and talk to them, especially if I encounter them in the wild. I'll talk to them and let them know that I mean them no harm, etc., etc. Or just, see if they'll approach me or I can approach them. And if I have anything in my pocket they might eat, I'll throw it to them. And I don't think that I am in any way special in the way that I regard animals. I don't think that what has made my business successful has been that I have something that other people cannot learn to do. And that has always been actually the basis of the way that I train humans. I prefer to say that I train humans to work with their dogs rather than that I train dogs, because it makes much more sense to me to equip someone with the tools to work with their own dog than it does for them to view me as a special guru and I'm the only one that can do the thing, because that's not going to help them the other 22 hours of that day and, the rest of the time until I come and work with them next, right? The only thing that matters is if you are able to work with your dog. But at any rate, dogs have been with humans, and there's some lack of consensus, of course, as to what the actual time frame is. But there are fossil records from 30,000 plus years ago with a dog being buried with a small child. And what does that mean? Well, obviously it's conjecture because we certainly weren't there, but you can gather from it that since they were buried together, they already were close. Right? If it had just been the kind of thing where some savage dog or wolf or something had come and attacked this child, they would not have buried them together. And the fact that it was a child means that even at that point, they were domesticated enough to have been accepted as part of the family and given a place of honor in terms of burial. So that means at least 30,000 years ago, which far exceeds any civilizations that we are aware of. Humans and dogs have made their hearth and home together. That's amazing to me. Obviously, I love dogs for all the regular reasons. They're just so loving and communicative, and they just bring joy to your life, right? And in addition to that, they are every bit as loyal as they are said to be. My own dog, Beowulf, currently sleeping on the rug not far from me, he's not the most cuddly dog there ever has been, but he would absolutely walk through fire to get to me and is so protective, and he views protecting the house and protecting me as his job, as his profession, and he is eager to perform it a little bit too eager sometimes, to perform it any chance he gets. And there's also the oxytocin that we exchange with dogs. A petting session with the dog is said to release a similar amount of oxytocin for the dog and for the human as a breastfeeding session for a mother and child. That's nothing to sneeze at. I'm not sure when the last time someone used that idiom, but it really is something. Even scientifically speaking, it's not just mythology. The dog-human relationship is very, very real. One of my favorite books is called The Paw Prints of History. It's a book by Stanley Coren, who I highly recommend to anyone who is interested in learning about dogs. He's a little bit hokey sometimes, but really, really informative, and with a dad joke sense of humor that hits me in the funny bone quite often. But one of the reasons I love this book specifically is because it shows you ways in which dogs literally change the course of human events, for better and for worse. And this is one of the first books I mention both to my employees. The people who work for me at Urban Dog Care NYC are given essentially a curriculum of learning before they start work, because it is assumed that anyone can walk a dog, right? Dog walking is not a job that is given a lot of credit, and that's a shame, because really good dog walkers are like really good childcare workers, right? They will work with your child in ways that you can't because they have more knowledge than you do. One of the ways I look at it is that my business is kind of like the private school of dog walkers. Not only do I make sure that we're all knowledgeable, but also we treat them as if they were literally our own dogs. We don't load up with as many dogs as possible. We don't have like 10, 15 dogs at a time so that we can make the most money. But what I try and do is I try and keep it to, honestly, 2 to 4 dogs. Sometimes, and as much as often, 1-on-1. Because for me, the idea is that we want to give your dog an experience, right? We want it to be like, here comes my favorite aunt or uncle to take me out since my parents are away, right? A genuine relationship that is based on love and trust, just like a human relationship, but also with the knowledge of how dogs work and how they think and how their noses work and the difference of the way that our world looks to us and the way that it looks to them. So given that knowledge, right, we are able to give dogs, at least I believe we are able to give dogs a much better experience than just, say, someone who picked up an app and decided that day that they were now a professional dog walker. And I was going to say no shade on those services, but I think they're by and large a bad idea. I know that I personally wouldn't trust some random stranger with no vetting, pun not intended, but we'll let it stay. Someone with no vetting come into my house and take what amounts to my child out into the world, to say nothing of in my home. Beowulf is like my son, and scoff at it if you want to, but I think that's the way that we should regard this relationship, right? And it's the same for all intents and purposes in terms of the duties you have. You have to educate them, you have to feed them, you have to keep them safe, and you have to keep them from becoming a menace to society, right? All of those are just the job of a parent. And of course, I'm not equating, having dogs to human children. That's not the point I'm trying to make. I'm just saying that we should look at the relationship between dogs and humans with much more reverence. But anyway, getting back to this book. One of the reasons that I start with this book is because a lot of people haven't quite wrapped their heads around the fact that dogs and humans really do have a special relationship, and dogs aren't listed in our history books as having had any market effect on history, right? But they most definitely have. And I say often, it's very unlikely that humans would have survived without dogs. Because that relationship, dogs provided us and we provided them with some extremely, extremely important facets of life. And the way that we're built works together just so well. You couldn't have designed it better, really. You have the taller, upright creature who uses their eyes primarily, right? We've talked before about how when we discuss what we're thinking or what we think of the world and how we look at the world, we talk about it in terms of our point of view, or this is my vision for this, or blah, blah, blah. And all of that is there because the eyes are so important to us. And for dogs, it's the nose. And they are lower to the ground. They have a different center of gravity, and they work in the world of scent in ways that we just have absolutely no clue about, right? Not only are their noses these amazing instruments, like the physical structure of the nose itself, which contains much more, not only more capacity for acquiring scent, the two different nostrils with the basically vents for cycling scent, and inside you have what's known as the Jacobson's organ, the vomeronasal organ that, helps them to further investigate as it travels through the passageways. And then they have their olfactory bulb in their brain is way bigger than humans, even given the size that their brains are much smaller than ours. So they are acquiring such a world of information from their noses. And it's just so amazing to think how your world would look like if you used scent as the primary way through which you experience the world. It's really cool. I'll give you an example of one of these stories. So in the Revolutionary War, George Washington, who was a big dog lover, at first was getting positively trounced by a man named General Howe, who was the British general who was leading the Queen's army, as they tried to put down what they viewed as a rebellion. The war was not going well at first for Washington's Revolutionary Army. And there came a point during their battles when General Howe's dog became lost and was found by Washington's men. I'm sure they proposed all manner of dastardly things to do to the dog to teach General Howe a lesson. But Washington, being a dog lover, took the dog and washed it, gave it some food, and saw to it, and then returned the dog to General Howe. After calling a ceasefire, the actual note said, "General Washington's compliments to General Howe. General Washington does himself the pleasure to return to him a dog which accidentally fell into his hands, and by the inscription on the collar appears to belong to General Howe." Now, that seems like a really random, tiny little tidbit, right? But General Howe wasn't the general that completed the war for the British. In fact, after this encounter, he appeared to soften towards the rebels, air quotes rebels, and didn't pursue them with the same vigor, and eventually he resigned. Now, do we know for sure that he resigned just because of this dog? It could have been any number of things, but it's pretty clear that the move really touched him, because he said as much. He said that it was the act of a gentleman and it was just a nice thing to do. And of course, he must have been, heartbroken that his dog had gotten lost behind enemy lines. At any rate, General Howe resigned and was replaced by someone else who did not have the knowledge or the skill as a general, and America won the Revolutionary War. Now, we might talk about, in another episode, the underpinnings of that, why the Revolutionary War was not what we think it was. But for the purposes of this conversation, a dog and the love of a dog and the deep, heartfelt communion between two dog lovers changed the course of human history. One could say that it is, of course, among the reasons, but one of the reasons that we're not still some sort of giant colony of Britain. And here's the thing. This has happened so many times during human history. In researching for the book, I tried to find statistics on crimes that were committed against people who had dogs at the time of the commission of the crime. And I was not able to find anything, but my guess is that it's significantly less, and not just with large dogs that are physically imposing, but I bet with small dogs as well, because essentially they're like an alarm, right? And they make it just a more unpredictable situation, which is bound to deter people unless they are, highly motivated otherwise. So even in our modern day lives, dogs have what is a very, very marked and remarkable effect in a lot of ways that we don't notice, especially in the city. But I encourage any of my city-dwelling friends to spend some time with your dog in a quiet, secluded house in the country, and you will swiftly understand why people love having dogs around so much, right? When you're out someplace where there's just nothing but the sound of the wind and the trees, and at night it's frankly kind of frightening sometimes, when you have a dog, it just makes everything go a little easier and feel a little better. Because, should anybody be anywhere near the house, you'll have a lot of warning. And that's kind of the way that the relationship started. It was utility in addition to a strong emotional connection as well. So we have to keep in mind that the way that we live with dogs now is pretty far removed from the way that the relationship works best and naturally. And on the subject, one of the silver linings to the entire social isolation and quarantine thing is that dogs have just never been happier. This is the way that it's supposed to be. And I always remind people that people are supposed to be with their dogs all day long. It's the most unnatural thing we do. And, well, I wouldn't say the most unnatural. The most unnatural thing we do is some of the selective breeding that we do these days, which, it has to be said, whenever dogs are discussed, it has to be said that kennel clubs are a relic that need to be put in the dustbin of history. They're not good for dogs. And I know a lot of us have favorite breeds. I myself am partial to Australian Shepherds and Corgis and mixes of those dogs, right? But I will never buy a dog. A dog is not a product, and it should always be considered an adoption. If you're getting a dog, it should always be looked at as an adoption. And if it's not, that's not a place that should even be allowed to give you a dog, because this is not a bag. This is not like a Fabergé egg or something. This is a friend, right? This is going to be your best friend for the next 12 to 19 years, if you're lucky. And we should look more at choosing dogs the way we think of choosing people, right? Lots of us have types, but those of us who are smart understand that the only type you should have is in terms of personality and in terms of goals and in terms of the way you live your life. And the same thing is very, very true of dogs. lots of people, especially when certain dogs become popular, that becomes the dog that everyone gets. And I don't really blame people for this, because if you actually look at the history of, again, those kennel clubs, breed fancy, and pure breeding in general, a lot of it is, relatively speaking, new. I mean, it's not totally new because, yes, there always has been selective breeding, even though I think a lot of people have the misconception that humans saw wolves and decided we're going to make dogs out of those, and that just doesn't make sense, right? There's no reason to believe that we had an advanced enough understanding of genetics to know what we were going to get by breeding certain dogs, right? It just beggars belief, and it's this weirdly human-centric way of looking at things. It just doesn't hold up to a little bit of simple, logical scrutiny, right? 30,000 years ago plus, we were just trying to not die. So the idea that, these early humans, or not that early humans, but you know what I mean, that humans were deciding, you know what, I want a dog that has a really long body and a little short face. Like, of course not, right? And the short face thing actually came from, I believe, China, where they were trying to make dogs look like lions, but didn't really have any access to lions. It was more like the mythological lion. But I'll get into that another time when I give that full story. But at any rate, the breeds that we have now, especially over the last 100 years, they're kind of abominable. And we're used to them, but I really want you to take a good look at a bulldog. Look at it and listen to how it breathes. Look at the way that it has to handle food. Look how close its nose is to its eyes, right? These are all things that are really, really bad for the species. And you may not have known this either, but nature has essentially washed her hands of all bulldog breeds. Their heads are too big, and they can't be carried to term in over 80% of the time in some breeds. There's really no clearer way for nature to say, I don't support this, than to make it unable for them to be brought to term. The only reason that they aren't bred out is because we deliberately, because there is a money incentive, continue to breed them. Doesn't that strike you as kind of cruel? Right? Bulldogs live on average like 7-8 years. Dogs already live a cruelly short period of time. It's just the right length of time for you to have like a full decade plus with them and get really attached, and then that's when they go. But to shorten that to 7 years, 8 years, because you like a dog with a flat face that snuffles a lot, it's genuinely cruel to all concerned. And here's the thing. It's something that we could stop today by just not supporting kennel clubs and breed associations, because it's completely arbitrary. These decisions are not made for the health and the safety of these dogs. It's not made for anything other than aesthetics. These decisions are purely made for aesthetics. The only dogs who I think should be bred are dogs that are going to serve a working purpose. And with breeders who understand, that you need a good amount of outbreeding in order to keep the species healthy. I mean, that's the most basic genetic science. In humans, we call it inbreeding, and in dogs, we call it pure breeding. What's the difference? It's just a question of how we have branded things and what we have gotten used to. And I find that a lot of the issues with dogs that we have now tie in very well to a lot of the other problems we face. Dominance-based training is based on the ideas that are prevalent in patriarchy and in toxic masculinity. The idea that you have to be in authoritarian control of your dog in order to get the best behavior, rather than by working with them and showing them affection and doing things that they will enjoy so that they will repeat the things that you want them to do. It's actually fairly simple if you think about what should be the logical way to approach things, but we're just not used to it. To the degree that lots of us still use terms like the alpha dog, etc., even though, and let me put a point on this, the studies where they came up with these terms, and with a rigid and hierarchical way of looking at the way that dog families and dog groups are set up, well, those came from a study of captive wolves, not from any studies of dogs, right? And if you actually look at dogs, even, so-called wild dogs or pariah dogs as they are known, because there's no such thing as a wild dog. There are dogs without homes, but any dog, a stray dog, can be turned into a family dog very easily because by definition, dogs are not wild. But at any rate, dogs that are living just out, that don't have homes, that are just living stray, the way that they form their societies is not rigid and hierarchical. And in fact, the dog that has the most social connections is the dog that usually is in charge, I say with those air quotes again, because they know where the most resources are, they are the most trusted, etc., etc. I do find that using dominance methodology is a good shorthand, right? Like some dogs do act like alpha in terms of, some dogs are just bossier. Some dogs are just, they're just kind of dicks, right? Like they boss around the other dogs. They make sure they get to eat first. They make sure they get to go through doors first. And that is a thing, right? But it's not to say that that is the natural state of things or that it's anything other than the personality of a particular dog. And the more you know about dogs, the more you discover that there is as much difference within breeds as within dogs of different breeds. So even breeds as we understand them are not as hard and fast a rule as we believe them to be, or as it is commonly thought to be. So I just wanted to give a little overview on some of my thoughts about dogs. By no means exhaustive because they can get rather exhaustive. But I just wanted to switch gears a little bit and talk about something else in which I have a great deal of interest and also that I've been studying for more than a decade. I guess more than 12 years at this point, since I started studying dogs and working with them. Time goes by extremely quickly. So that's it for now. We'll revisit this topic many, many times because there are many great stories and great tips that I would like to share with you. In addition to the politics and other things we discuss here, I feel like dogs are such an important part of human existence that it merits discussion among all of the important topics. Hope you're all staying in and staying safe, and when and if they try and get you to leave your house too soon, just don't listen to them, right? We've got to keep this thing slowed down. It's not as if we're going to stop it. It's just that we're trying to prevent, and we're doing a rather good job so far of preventing COVID-19 from overwhelming our systems. But if we all decide too early just to go back out, we're going to be in trouble and we'll be back in quarantine again. So while you're in quarantine, please do remember, take some time to do some activism, 20 minutes a day. Just a few phone calls, a few posts, some letters, some local work, just talking to your neighbors, organizing rent strikes or general strikes, which is something that I'm going to talk about in the next episode. But since we have this extra time, figure out how you can use it to make the world better for us when we do return to a sort of more standard way of living. Thank you very much for listening. Please do follow me on Instagram at FocusedOnInfinity, on Twitter at WatcherInfinite, and please do support my Patreon, which is now live and has just a wide variety of things, everything from gardening and pictures of dogs and some of my old art photos and other projects that I've been working on in addition to the podcast, which will always be free. It's patreon.com/focusedoninfinity. And there are levels from $2 up to $50. Whatever you can afford is very much appreciated. Thanks again, sending much love, and for now, Grendel out.